God is not supposed to be singular in the Bible. It's plural in all cases, gods with an S.
So Billy continues on his quest to prove to anyone who actually understands the biblical languages that he doesn't understand them. The word Elohim is what's known as a concretized abstract plural. And this is a function within the Hebrew language where a plural word is used in a singular sense. And a concretized abstract plural operates in a similar way to, say, the English word sheep. So we can have 1 sheep or 50 sheep.
The word Elohim is not like the word sheep, that is the same in the singular as it is in the plural. Elohim, you go to the roots of the word, means the powerful ones. The Elohim exhibit plural behaviors. They go to war against each other, they have conversations among one another, they have different agendas for humanity. The Elohim say, let us make the humans to look like us. The Elohim say, we don't want the humans to be too much like one of us. In Genesis 11, you've got the Elohim saying, let us go down and confuse their languages. Where it gets confusing is that a later writer who knows the holy name of Yahweh has imported that name into earlier Elohim texts. There is no question that Elohim is in the plural, and that the Elohim plural stories parallel the Anunnaki plural stories.
Do you believe that there is a hell and a heaven as we sort of typically understand it? A place that is great to go to after we die, and a place that is very hot?
I think it's more so that you will experience the full weight of the separation from God's goodness. Not necessarily a separation from God, because I think God's punishment and his wrath are going to be felt there. But if we're talking about like a good place, bad place, in the very simplest of terms, yes. But heaven isn't full of good people. Heaven is full of people who understand they are not good enough. And so I mentioned that like justice, mercy thing. Justice is fulfilled on Jesus. So because justice is fulfilled, now mercy, which is not getting what we do deserve, is able to be given to those who put their trust in Jesus.
So if I don't believe in Jesus,
Yeah.
and I don't believe in the Bible, but I live a good life, I'm nice to people, I'm charitable, try and be kind wherever I can be,
Yeah.
and I don't believe in God, am I going to hell or heaven as it relates to the scriptures?
Well, I don't think if you're living your life rejecting God, God is not going to force you into his presence.
So I'm not going to go into heaven. I'm not going to go to heaven then.
No.
Where am I going to go?
Well, you would go to hell.
And what is that place like according to the scripture? Give me a depiction in my mind of what hell might be like for me.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a good place. It's not a nice place.
If you have any Christianity in your background, you may know the verse I'm about to quote. Trust in Yahweh with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding, but in all your ways defer to him, and he will direct your paths. Now, you may know a different translation of that. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, in all your ways acknowledge him. And it was very often quoted as the bedrock of humble Christian spirituality. Lean not on your own understanding. Trust in Yahweh with all your heart. What does it mean not to lean on your own understanding? It means not to think for yourself. It means not to trust your own mind if a religious authority is telling you something else. But it took me a long time to realize that this verse, trotted out as a bedrock of humility and spirituality, was in fact a device in a web of thought control used by institutional Christianity through the generations to empower those who teach and disempower the flock. So the reason I mention that is because that in my coaching space, I have found in recent years that a lot of people have really struggled to give themselves permission to look at the kind of things we do at Ancient Knowledge Academy, or the things I've written about in the Eden series, without the terrifying fear lurking in the wings that if they believe the wrong thing, they're going to go to hell. That if they believe the wrong thing, they're going to be tortured in perpetuity by an implacable God who will not have mercy after you've died. Now, if you have had that kind of religion in your background, it can be quite difficult to shake it off. But the purpose of this unit is to tell you that it is totally ill-founded, that the doctrine of hell or eternal conscious torment or eternal punishment is built on a foundation of sand. Until you can shake off this background fear, you do not have the freedom to explore. How can you possibly have the creative freedom to explore possibilities if the prospects of getting it wrong mean that you're going to be tortured forever?
When I went to theological college many, many years ago, it was my personal goal to research hell, because I became a believer when I was 17 from a background in atheism. And I always felt that the church's teaching on hell was really out of kilter with everything else I was picking up about the teaching of Jesus. It is so out of proportion. I mean, an eternal punishment for a finite crime can only be a miscarriage of justice. And if I would feel sorry for someone burning alive forever, then how could a God of love not feel sorry for them? I can't be more compassionate than God, can I? I knew straight away there was something really off about this doctrine. And so I made it my goal to research hell and find out, is it what Jesus taught? Is it what the apostles taught? Is that really the teaching of the Bible? And I found that it wasn't. Jesus taught about Gehenna. And in that verse, he's actually warning people about Gehenna. Gehenna was the rubbish tip outside of Jerusalem. So if you're going to take it literally, he's warning you about an ancient rubbish tip outside Jerusalem that no longer exists. So for the literalists, there's the literal meaning. But again, he's using it figuratively. He's talking about the trash heap of life. If you've got something that threatens to ruin your life and end you up on the trash heap of life, get rid of it. You don't want to end up there full of regret and remorse, unable to go back and change things. So that's how I take that. Read the Gehenna texts in the New Testament and you'll realize that's what Jesus is on about. He's not warning about eternal conscious torment in hell, which is a monstrous idea. And traditionally, Christians have threatened people all around the world with that, if they're not Orthodox Christians, threatening, men, women, and children with that horrific specter. It's not what Jesus taught. Gehenna is a place of ruination, and you should make every effort to avoid it. That is what Jesus was really on about. That's my view.
Everybody is going to hell. Everybody. Here's how I've said it in the past, right? The Bible is very clear. All good people go to heaven. But Jesus said, no one is good but God alone. So if all good people go to heaven, and no one is good but God alone, only God is in heaven.
Christianity has a particular moral vision of God. When Jesus talks about God, he uses the Greek word theos, and the divine qualities he espouses are 180 degrees removed from the morality of the Elohim and Yahweh characters in the Hebrew scriptures. That ought to clue the Christian believer straight away that at least some of the Elohim and Yahweh stories are something other than God's stories. They are something other than revelations of the character of God. And so I believe Christians, when they read these ancient texts from the Hebrew canon, should be on the front foot in recognizing that we are being told about something else, contact with a different kind of entity in the deep past. Aaron's sons, Nadab and Abihu, took their censers, put fire in them, and added incense, and they offered unauthorized fire before Yahweh contrary to his command. So to clarify, when we get down to the Hebrew, this unauthorized fire that Yahweh had not commanded, what it's telling us is that they have got the recipe wrong. It's not that Yahweh didn't like smoke or this wasn't a good moment for him to have a smoke. They got the recipe wrong. There was something off in this fire or smoke that Abihu and Nadab bring into the presence of Yahweh. Look what happens when you get the smell wrong. So fire came out from the presence of Yahweh and consumed them, and they died before Yahweh. Moses then said to Aaron, "This is what Yahweh spoke of when he said, 'Among those who approach me, I will show myself holy. In the sight of all the people, I will be honored.'" Aaron remained silent. Moses summoned Mishael and Elzaphan, sons of Aaron's uncle Uzziel, and said to them, "Come here, carry your cousins outside the camp, away from the front of the sanctuary." So they came and carried them, still in their tunics, outside the camp, as Moses ordered. Then Moses said to Aaron and his sons Eleazar and Ithamar, "Do not let your hair become unkempt, and do not tear your clothes, or you will die, and Yahweh will be angry with the whole community." So let's be clear what's just happened. Two of the sons of Aaron is the high priest, his sons are priests, have taken in an incense offering to Yahweh, but it wasn't strictly according to his instructions. They've got the recipe wrong. And so he has incinerated them to death in front of their father and in front of Moses. And when this happens, Moses says, "Don't say anything, Aaron. I told you he was like this. Go and get your cousins to get the bodies out of there, and they must not show any mourning," that's the tearing clothes and hair unkempt, "because that will offend Yahweh, and they will be killed as well." What's the purpose of this story? Is it a made-up story? Because very often preachers like to say, well, the moral of the story is, tell me how you can get a positive moral out of this story. If it's a fiction that's been created to teach a moral, what is the moral you're going to teach from this? The overarching purpose of the canon is for the reader to love and worship Yahweh. Is that going to be the result from reading this story? I would suggest that if the overarching agenda is to get the reader to love and worship Yahweh, this is a deeply inconvenient story, because this will get the reader to despise and fear such a character. That's not the same thing at all. If the agenda is to get the reader to worship Yahweh, this is a deeply inconvenient story that would have been better left out. So we have to ask, why has it been included? If it's not a story that results in a positive religious imperative, if it's not a story that results in a positive moral lesson, I would suggest it's an inconvenient story that's been included because it couldn't be gotten rid of. In other words, it was a part of the cultural memory that, though inconvenient, had to be included because it was known. If that's the case, then it's a memory of something that is not God. Now, someone might say, but wait a minute, I believe Yahweh is God. And certainly there are passages in the Hebrew scriptures where the word Yahweh seems to be used in that way, when Yahweh is the ideation of the creator of the cosmos, when Yahweh is the recipient of worship. All sorts of grandiose and transcendent things are said about Yahweh. But I'm talking about these passages where Yahweh is an active player in the story, because in this story, Yahweh does something. He incinerates people who've got the smell wrong. So where's the religious imperative from that? Where is the positive moral from that? And Yahweh is not the only Elohim who needs these smells. If we read the story of Bel and the dragon, which is a suffix to the book of Daniel in the Hebrew scriptures, we see there that Elohim also needs the same smells of burnt oxen and burnt sheep. They're clearly made of the same stock. So I would suggest that there is no Zitz im Leben for this as a moral tale or as a story bringing a religious imperative. Bible scholars talk about the redaction of the Bible being organized by Yahwist, Elohist, Deuteronomist, and priestly authors. And they talk about the agendas reflected by these different layers of redaction. And so they say some of the editors, they've written this, they presented this story in a way that will endorse the kingship, the monarchy, the Jewish monarchy. Or they've written this in a way that endorses the Deuteronomistic laws. Or they've written this in a way that authenticates the priesthood. This story doesn't do any of those things. It is a picture of a terrifying, monstrous being who will incinerate people without mercy, without forgiveness, without warning, because they got the smell wrong. So I suggest this is an inconvenient story that's been included simply because it is part of the cultural memory. It has to be included, and it doesn't serve the monotheistic purpose of the canon as a whole. If you hold the view that Yahweh is God, and if to maintain that view you find you have to call evil things good, that should be your clue to hit the pause button and think again. If you're having to justify things you know to be evil and wicked to maintain that theology, there must be something wrong with that theology, mustn't there? So let's have a look at another example. 2 Kings chapter 1. After Ahab's death, Moab rebelled against Israel. Now Ahaziah, the king, had fallen through the lattice of his upper room in Samaria and injured himself. So he sent messengers saying to them, "Go and consult Baal-zebub, the god of Ekron. Go and consult Baal-zebub, the Elohim of Ekron, to see if I will recover from this injury." So he sent messengers saying to them, "Go and consult Baal-zebub, the Elohim of Ekron, to see if I'll recover from this injury." But the messenger of Yahweh said to Elijah the Tishbite, "Go up and meet the messengers of the king of Samaria and ask them, is it because there is no Elohim in Israel that you are going off to consult Baal-zebub, the Elohim of Ekron? Therefore, this is what Yahweh says, you will not leave the bed you're lying on. You will certainly die." So Elijah went. When the messengers returned to the king, he asked them, "Why have you come back?" "A man came to meet us," they replied, "and he said to us, 'Go back to the king who sent you and tell him, this is what Yahweh says. Is it because there is no Elohim in Israel that you are sending men to consult Baal-zebub, the Elohim of Ekron? Therefore, you will not leave the bed you are lying on. You will certainly die.'" The king asked them, "What kind of man was it who came to meet you and told you this?" They replied, "He was a man with a garment of hair and with a leather belt around his waist." The king said, "That was Elijah the Tishbite." Then he sent to Elijah a captain with his company of 50 men. The captain went up to Elijah, who was sitting on the top of a hill, and said to him, "Man of Elohim, the king says, 'Come down.'" Elijah answered the captain, "If I am a man of Elohim, may fire come down from heaven and consume you and your 50 men." Then fire fell from heaven and consumed the captain and his men. At this, the king sent to Elijah another captain with his 50 men. The captain said to him, "Man of Elohim, this is what the king says. Come down at once." "If I am a man of Elohim," Elijah replied, "may fire come down from heaven and consume you and your 50 men." Then the fire of Elohim fell from heaven and consumed him and his 50 men. So the king sent a third captain with his 50 men. This third captain went up and fell on his knees before Elijah. "Man of Elohim," he begged, "please have respect for my life and the lives of these 50 men, your servants. See, fire has fallen from heaven and has consumed the first two captains and all their men, but now have respect for my life." The messenger of Yahweh said to Elijah, "Go down with him, do not be afraid of him." So Elijah got up and went down with him to the king. He told the king, "This is what Yahweh says. Is it because there is no Elohim in Israel for you to consult, that you have sent messengers to consult Baal-zebub, the Elohim of Ekron? Because you have done this, you will never leave the bed you are lying on. You will certainly die." So he died, according to the word of Yahweh that Elijah had spoken. King Ahaziah had broken his back. He wanted to know if he was going to recover. And so he sent for word to a neighboring Elohim. The word, of course, means powerful one. He sent messengers to get a medical prognosis from a neighboring Elohim, presumably because he had heard that the powerful one of Ekron was good at medical prognostics. But apparently, when either Yahweh or Elijah, the messenger of Yahweh, or the messenger who communicates on Yahweh's behalf to Elijah, when they get wind of this, Yahweh is very offended and says, "Because you've consulted the wrong Elohim, I'm going to make sure you die." That's really the nub of the story. What kind of person would treat a wounded man that way? It's the way Yahweh does. And not only that, but he incinerates 100 people when they are sent as part of the king's inquiry into the matter. Just like that. These soldiers hadn't done anything wrong. These are 100 innocent people in the service of the king who Yahweh dispenses with just like that. Tell me, what is the religious imperative from this story? Never question. Never go to another doctor. Never think for yourself. Never inquire into what process led to something that seems utterly unjust. What is the religious imperative from this story? Is there a positive moral of the story we can extract from this? I think if the agenda of the whole canon is to get us to love and worship Yahweh, this story is a fly in the ointment. That's why I take it to be part of an earlier tradition, a story that was originally there for another reason before this overlay of Yahwist monotheism came along in the final redaction. It's been included because it's already part of the cultural memory, even though the story itself doesn't serve the overarching agenda. It is an inconvenient story, an inconvenient vestige of cultural memory.
I'm just curious, when you say that there are not just parallels, but there's actual copying, looking at Genesis chapter 1 and 2, where the creation story is summarized in the Bible, what are the actual kind of parallels there that you're looking to? Because as someone who's read both, I not only do I not find parallels, I actually, and this is the majority of ancient Near Eastern scholarship with me, think that Genesis chapter 1 is actually an apologetic against documents like the Enuma Elish. So what are the parallels there? It's the details that make the difference. And if we're looking at not the superficial crossovers, but the actual themes and concepts of what it's saying, I would say, just with all due respect, the parallels linguistically are not there. There might be superficial kind of concepts that are there, but they're so superficial that we can find them in everything, in the sense of I'm in my office studio, you're in your office studio. that doesn't mean that, that we're the same people or we're even in the same place. Does that make sense?
When George Smith first started sharing fragments of the Epic of Gilgamesh with the world, one of the most exciting aspects of it was the parallels between its telling of the flood story, the Utnapishtim story, and the biblical story of Noah. And I just want to flag some of the parallels. In Gilgamesh, the gods decide to destroy humanity because humans are noisy. Whereas in the book of Genesis, God decides to destroy humanity because of widespread violence and sinfulness. In the earlier source story, human beings haven't done anything wrong. They've just multiplied and become too noisy for the Dingir, too noisy for the Anunnaki. The Bible has changed that story because God can't do anything wrong. Now it has to be the sinfulness of humanity that provokes this terrible decision. In Gilgamesh, the god Ea, aka Enki, secretly warns Utnapishtim and tells him to build a boat. In Genesis, God instructs Noah to build an ark. In Gilgamesh, Enlil is the destroyer and Ea, Enki, is the savior. But in the Genesis version, God is the destroyer and God is the savior. So God has to rescue Noah from God. And here you see the framing of some of the church's teaching about God rescuing human beings from God. A somewhat nonsensical idea, if I might say, but it undergirds a lot of what the church teaches about human sinfulness, the nature of the cross, the nature of Jesus as Savior. It's all rooted in this rewriting of the Mesopotamian story. In Gilgamesh, a massive cube-like vessel is built with precise dimensions and sealed with pitch. In Genesis, a long rectangular cuboid ark is built with exact measurements and sealed with pitch. And the volume of these craft is almost identical. There's no more than a 4% variance in the volume of the craft according to the measures given. In Gilgamesh, Utnapishtim loads family members, craftsmen, and the seed of all living creatures. In Genesis, Noah brings his family and pairs, or 7 pairs, of animals. In Gilgamesh, a violent storm sent by the sky people rages for 6 days and 7 nights. In Genesis, it rains for 40 days and 40 nights, and the waters last for much longer. In Gilgamesh, Utnapishtim releases a dove, then a swallow, then a raven. In Genesis, Noah releases a raven and then a dove, which he releases 3 times. In Gilgamesh, Utnapishtim offers a sacrifice, and the Anunnaki gather around it. In Genesis, Noah offers a burnt offering as a sacrifice, and God smells the aroma and is pleased. In Gilgamesh, Utnapishtim and his wife are granted immortality and live far away. In Genesis, Noah is blessed, humanity is given a covenant, and the rainbow becomes a sign that God will not destroy humanity this way again. Almost immediately, scholars could see that Gilgamesh had the earlier version of the story and that it had been boiled down in the biblical account.
So looking at some of those manuscripts that actually can trace back to the actual time frame of Jesus and answering questions like, is what we have now what the original authors wrote back then? So I think there's a historical question to it. And I, in my own personal investigation, genuinely think that the evidence, the publicly available evidence, gets us back to not only the time frame of Jesus, but to early eyewitness testimony that proclaims that this first century Jewish itinerant rabbi who was walking the dusty streets of first century made these claims, and then there is sufficient evidence to say that he predicted his own death and resurrection in the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Those aren't actually our earliest source material for the life of Jesus. That comes in the person of Paul.
It really depends what you mean by resurrection, because at the beginning of Christianity, resurrection meant more than one thing. And not all Christian believers believed the same thing about the resurrection of Jesus. So if you go to the writings of the Apostle Paul, for instance, when he talks about the resurrection body in 1 Corinthians 15, he's talking about the nature of Jesus' resurrection and what should our expectations be concerning life after death. So also is the resurrection of the dead. It is sown in corruption, it is raised in incorruption. It is sown in dishonor, it is raised in glory. It is sown in weakness, it is raised in power. It is sown a natural body, it is raised a spiritual body. There is a natural body, and there is a spiritual body. 1 Corinthians 15, 42 to 44. What Paul puts forward in 1 Corinthians 15 is really very close to the mainstream Greek view of that time, which you can find unpacked in the writings of Plato, for instance. And so that view is that we are primarily beings of consciousness, and that we existed as beings of consciousness before we individuated and incarnated as material beings. Now we're having this material experience, and then when our bodies expire, we continue as beings of consciousness and go on to an experience that's unimaginably different, or maybe we go around again. That was the Greek idea. And in 1 Corinthians 15, that's really the notion that Paul is putting forward. He says that we have a corruptible body that dies and decomposes, and that what goes on is a spiritual body. In other words, we continue as spiritual beings or beings of consciousness. Paul's view of resurrection does not require a dead body to be reanimated and then made indestructible so it can then carry on for eternity. That's not his view. His view is a spiritual one. And when he talks about his own encounter with the risen Jesus, he doesn't talk about encountering a reanimated dead body that's now indestructible. No, he describes a subjective experience of light and love and a changed life purpose and a voice that spoke to him. It's a spiritual experience that he describes, very similar to my own experience and the new birth experiences of countless believers from that time to this. So that's very different from encountering a reanimated body. And remember, he's talking about our resurrection and the resurrection of Jesus. Now, the Apostle Paul tells this story because he's reflecting on the Christian story, which appears to end with a dead Jesus. And he's wanting to say, no, the story doesn't end at death. The story is longer than that. Jesus transcended death, and so will we. And if we can't believe it of Jesus, how can we believe it of ourselves? So Paul is really preaching for that kind of a view, reflecting on a Christian story that without what he's saying ends with Jesus' death. If we go to the first and earliest iteration of Mark's Gospel, which we find in the Codex Sinaiticus, it ends with the empty tomb and a promise of resurrection appearances. So Mark doesn't go into what those resurrection appearances mean, and he could mean exactly what Paul means. They're writing at about the same time as each other. Matthew, Luke, and John tell a different story. Their stories are of Jesus post the crucifixion as a reanimated dead body. Jesus come back to life from death. He can eat, he can cook food, but something is different about him that means he's going to go on for eternity. So there we have these different views of resurrection. Did Jesus die, and then was his body reanimated, made indestructible, and then translated into space where it will exist forever? That's the Matthew, Luke, John story. Is that the case? Or is what Paul wrote closer to the mark? that we are all beings of consciousness on this interesting journey as beings of consciousness, material beings, beings of consciousness. We find it actually in the prologue of John's Gospel, where the writer says, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Then the Word became flesh and had this material experience and dwelt among us." And then towards the end of John's Gospel, we hear Jesus praying to his Father and saying, "And now, Father, I'm about to return to you, back to the glory we enjoyed before the foundation of the world." So that life cycle that John gives to Jesus, Greek thought said, is true of all of us. Resurrection is something that will happen to all of us because it's just the natural cycle of life. A being of consciousness becomes a material being. And then it's the great repose, a return to the pleroma, a return to source after this material episode concludes. And I think what's different about that is that with the Matthew, Luke, John story, resurrection is something you can't be guaranteed. It's a miracle. So you'll have to be on the right side of God for that to happen to you. Better stay on his right side if you want a resurrection. Whereas, if the Platonic story, the Greek story is true, resurrection is just part of all our experience. It's something we can all look forward to. We've come into this material world to have material experiences, to be enriched by them, to have as good an experience as we can, and then we'll go on to something unimaginably different. And I find that to be a more compelling, more empowering story. The one that says, better stay on the right side of God, leaves us very open to manipulation by religious authorities, and it's not difficult to find examples of that through the ages. And so that's one of the reasons why I love talking about Jesus in India. A reminder that there are these other Christian narratives that have been there from the beginning, narratives that are not designed to manipulate and terrify, but to inspire, to invite us to explore, and to have the most extraordinary human experience possible. Thank you for watching The Fifth Kind. If you enjoy our documentaries and interviews, sign up for Ancient Knowledge Academy, a learning community for people who are exploring questions of human origins, human potential, and our place in the cosmos. Our courses will include navigating unexpected shifts and transitions in our lives, reframing faith and recovering from fundamentalism, living with close encounters and unexplained phenomena, learning to read the ancient cuneiforms of Sumer, Babylonia, Arcadia, and Assyria, and reading them alongside the Bible. A virtual tour of Van Province in Turkey, digging into stories told by Bronze Age artifacts that take us into the world of the last Ice Age, more than 10,000 years ago. 7 workshops in mindfulness and consciousness to heighten your cognitive powers, your intuitive capacity, and your capacity to manage stress. Finding the juicy bits in the works of Plato, and how to find and talk about paleocontact in the Bible. Go to ancientknowledgeacademy.com to find out more.